For years, Julia had been promised to another man. The contract was written, witnessed, recorded, the ordinary arrangement of a Roman household, unremarkable in every way. She was 17. Her fiancé, Quintus Servilius Caepio, waited for the wedding date. In the spring of 59 BC, her father tore up the paper. Not because of anything Julia had done. Not because of anything Caepio had done. Caesar needed something from a man older than him, and Julia was the only thing he had left to give. She was married within the month. The summer sun of 60 BC beat down upon the bustling Roman Forum, where the daily administration of the empire seemed eternal and unbroken. Yet, beneath this tranquil facade, the rigid obstructionism of the Senate was pushing the state toward a fatal dead end. Frustrated by endless legislative traps, three unstoppable titans retreated into the shadows, merging their overwhelming wealth and armies. The monumental laws designed to paralyze ambition were crushed instantly, turning the proud Senate into a hollow, irrelevant debating society. Amidst the wreckage of Roman liberty stands Julia, a tragic pawn handed over to her father's greatest rival to seal a blood pact. Can an empire forged in such profound betrayal ever escape the relentless judgment of history? The true tragedy of Rome was not how loudly it fell, but how quietly it surrendered. The architects of the cartel. The Republic of Rome did not end with the breach of its walls, or the march of a foreign army across the Italian peninsula. It ended in a private residence, unrecorded by the scribes of the Senate, behind closed doors. The laws of Rome had been engineered over 4 centuries to prevent a single monarch from ruling the city. The institutional architecture was a labyrinth of checks and balances. 2 consuls held veto power over each other. 10 tribunes of the plebs held veto power over the consuls. The Senate controlled the state treasury and the allocation of military commands. The popular assemblies controlled the elections and the passage of legislation. It was a machine designed to paralyze ambition and distribute power. In the year 60 BC, the machine was entirely bypassed. 3 men suspended their mutual hatred. Gaius Julius Caesar required the consulship. His career began with defiance, when Sulla the dictator ordered him to divorce his wife Cornelia. Fleeing into the country of the Sabines, changing his quarters frequently, Sulla's soldiers captured him. Caesar bribed their captain with 2 talents and put to sea, only to fall into the hands of Cilician pirates. He paid the ransom, returned with ships, and executed them. He traveled to Rhodes, studied rhetoric under Apollonius, and returned to Rome. He accumulated immense debt, owing 1,300 talents before holding public office. He rose to the office of aedile, and alongside his election as praetor, he obtained the office of Pontifex Maximus. When his creditors delayed his departure for his proconsulship in further Hispania, Marcus Licinius Crassus met the exigency with a loan of £200,000. Caesar left for his province, retrieved his financial position, and laid the foundations of a military reputation. Caesar returned from his governorship in Hispania Ulterior. His soldiers had hailed him imperator after a successful campaign. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus required land for his veterans and the ratification of his acts in the East. Born 6 years before Caesar, he possessed absolute military ambition. He had crushed the Marian party for Sulla, assuming command at Oximum where 3 armies surrounded him. The generals Brutus, Caius Caldus, and Carinus attempted to prevent his escape. But Pompey concentrated his forces, fell upon Brutus, destroyed the opposition, and defeated Marcius in the Apennines. The defeated Brutus was the father of an 8-year-old boy, the very man who would, decades later, assassinate Caesar. That same son, Brutus, would ultimately fight under Pompey, the man who slaughtered his father, to wage war against Caesar in the name of the Republic. Sulla compelled him to marry his stepdaughter Aemilia, warning him not to slumber. Pompey accepted the command of the Republic, receiving unlimited powers through the Gabinian and Manilian laws. He had spent years in the East, defeating the Cilician pirates who had disrupted Mediterranean shipping, conquering the remnants of the Seleucid Empire, subduing Judea, reorganizing the political architecture of an entire region under Roman authority. He had returned to Italy with immense financial assets plundered from the eastern Mediterranean, expecting the Senate to ratify the arrangements he had made, the client kingdoms he had established, the provincial boundaries he had drawn, the settlements that would determine how Rome governed the territory he had won for it. He disbanded his army, expecting the Senate to honor his requests, assuming his prestige guaranteed compliance. The Senate refused. The Optimates treated him with suspicion. Lucius Licinius Lucullus was the commander Pompey had replaced in the East. He demanded that Pompey's treaties be debated line by line, rather than ratified as a single block. Cato supported Lucullus. The procedural delays stretched for months. Pompey's veterans waited in the streets of Rome. The conqueror of the East was reduced to a petitioner in the Forum. Drifting apart from his former allies, Pompey retired to his villa. He waited in the countryside, realizing his military glory possessed no currency in the Curia. Marcus Licinius Crassus required tax concessions for his equestrian clients. These were the influential publicani, the tax-collecting syndicates of the Asian provinces, desperately seeking financial relief from the state. The publicani had overbid for the tax farming contracts in the province of Asia. A poor harvest ruined their margins. They faced catastrophic financial losses. Crassus approached the Senate to demand a renegotiation of the contracts and a rebate from the treasury. Cato blocked the relief measure. He invoked procedural rules to delay the vote. The financial markets of the city stalled. Beginning his career with 300 talents, he observed the fires of Rome and the collapsing buildings. He purchased 500 slave architects, bought burning houses, and rebuilt the neighborhoods. He owned silversmiths, stewards, and table waiters, attending to their instruction personally. He possessed silver mines and valuable land. Reputedly the richest man in Rome, he lent money to his friends without interest, but demanded precise repayment on the exact day. He undertook legal causes when Pompey and Caesar refused to stand up, greeted every citizen by name, provided citizen-like entertainments, and studied history and Aristotle. He hated Pompey, and Pompey hated Crassus. They stood at variance, and their rivalry defined the political landscape. The boundary of the gods. The cartel was not born from sudden ambition. It was the direct result of a legislative dead end manufactured by the Optimates, the conservative faction of the Senate. Led by Marcus Porcius Cato, the Senate weaponized the Constitution. They utilized the institutional mechanisms of the state to corner each man individually. The Senate blocked all three men. The Optimates calculated their advantage, relying on the institutional friction of the Republic. They believed the Constitution protected their supremacy. The wind blew through the columns of the Forum. The dust settled on the rostra. The sea washed against the docks of Ostia, and the daily administration of the empire continued without interruption. But in the sweltering summer of 60 BC, the political atmosphere reached a fever pitch. There is an invisible line carved into the earth of ancient Rome, a sacred trench established by the city's founders. It was designed to separate the civic heart of the Republic from the violence of the outside world. It is called the Pomerium. To step inside this boundary is to submit to the rule of law. For any general holding military command, crossing this line means instantly forfeiting his imperium, his army, and his right to a glorious military triumph. In the summer of the year 60 BC, victorious from the Iberian Peninsula, Gaius Julius Caesar stands just outside this sacred limit. He hungers for the ultimate prize, the consulship of Rome. But tradition and law demand that a candidate must present himself within the city walls as a private citizen. He sends a request to the Senate, asking for a simple bureaucratic concession to register his candidacy in absentia, while keeping his command intact outside the Pomerium. Caesar's demand was not an unprecedented overreach. Just a decade prior, in 71 BC, Pompey had returned from crushing the rebellion in Hispania to face the exact same dilemma: the triumph or the consulship. At the time, Pompey was only 35, well shy of the legal age limit of 42, and had bypassed every prerequisite lower office, including quaestor, aedile, and praetor, unlike Caesar. In short, Pompey had absolutely no legal right to even stand for the office. Yet, when Pompey parked his massive army just outside Rome's walls as a silent threat, the Senate bent the knee. They passed an unprecedented exemption, allowing him to register his candidacy in absentia while retaining his military command outside the walls. Ultimately, Pompey was elected in absentia, celebrated a spectacular triumph on December 31st, and simply laid down his arms the very next day, January 1st, to assume the consulship. The Senate would create entirely new statutes, even in direct violation of the Constitution, depending strictly on how many blades were waiting outside the walls. The difference between Caesar and Pompey was the raw size of their legions. Pompey had commanded a formidable juggernaut of at least 6 legions. Caesar, by contrast, led only 3, 2 he had inherited upon his posting, and a third he had raised with his own coin. Plutarch records what happened to the petition. Many senators were willing to grant it. Cato was not. When Cato saw that his colleagues were prepared to give Caesar what he wanted, he rose and spoke, and continued speaking. Cato spoke until the sun went down. He ran out the clock on the legislative session. The Senate adjourned without a vote. Caesar faced the trap. Caesar is forced to choose glory or power. He does not hesitate. He relinquishes his military command and his triumph. He crosses the Pomerium as a private citizen, his eyes fixed firmly on the highest office in the land: the Syndicate and the currency of flesh. Realizing that the stubborn obstructionism of the conservative establishment will thwart his every move, Caesar approaches Pompey and Crassus. The two men despised each other. Their enmity dated back a decade to the Spartacus revolt and their joint consulship in 70 BC. According to the accounts left by the historian Plutarch in his chronicles of Caesar's life, Caesar achieved the impossible. He managed to reconcile Pompey and Crassus. He manages to reconcile these two bitter enemies, convincing them that their endless bickering only empowers their mutual enemies in the Senate. The Senate possessed authority, but the three men possessed the resources. Each possessing something the others needed and lacking something the others possessed. Pompey commanded the absolute loyalty of thousands of battle-hardened veterans. Crassus controlled the capital's finances. Caesar offered the unstoppable political momentum and execution. They forge a pact of mutual support in 60 BC. To the Romans, it is known as amicitia, a term softly translated as friendship. But in the ruthless corridors of the late Republic, it is a cold, transactional alliance of the elite. This is not a formal, state-sanctioned, legally recognized commission. It is an extra-legal shadow government, a mafia-style cartel, a conspiracy to subvert the Constitution. Caesar, once a client to Pompey and Crassus, now stands as their equal. The scholar Marcus Terentius Varro, a contemporary of these events, wrote a pamphlet giving the arrangement a name that circulated in Rome at the time: Triumvirate. The three-headed monster. The Roman historian Livy, writing within a generation of the alliance's formation, described it in a sentence that later centuries would treat as definitive: a conspiracy against the state by its three leading citizens. According to the vivid accounts left by the historian Plutarch, and confirmed by the writings of the Roman biographer Suetonius and the historian Cassius Dio, the three men swore a solemn, treasonous oath in the shadows. It was an agreement binding their fates together, declaring that no state action should proceed if it dissatisfied any of the three. They agreed to parcel out the known world, dividing the provinces, the armies, and the money. The Roman Republic was effectively privatized. The cartel absorbed the functions of the government, and the Senate became an irrelevant debating society. This collusion, sealed in the shadows, struck with immediate force. Backed by a torrent of physical violence and capital from the two giants, Caesar was successfully elected to the consulship, together with the Senate's candidate, Bibulus. Suetonius records the mechanism directly. Caesar had joined forces with a candidate named Lucius Lucaeus. Since Lucaeus had more money and less influence, he agreed to fund the campaign bribes for both of them jointly. When the aristocratic party learned of this arrangement, they authorized Bibulus to match the payments. Suetonius records that even Cato did not deny that bribery, under these particular circumstances, served the good of the Republic. There is no difference between Caesar and Cato for what they did for the Republic. To secure an alliance born of mutual convenience, a permanent seal was required. A blood pact was necessary to bind the cartel with something stronger than mere spoken words. The men did not trust promises. They trusted physical collateral. The alliance required collateral to ensure none of the three would betray the others to the Optimates. The sociological clash between the senatorial illusion and the cartel reality demanded a biological transaction. Political loyalty was paid for in the currency of human lives. Flesh became the currency of statecraft. Caesar acted under the absolute legal authority of paterfamilias over his household. He held the fate of his only legitimate daughter, Julia, in his hands. She functioned as the asset. Julia was already contracted in a formal arrangement to Quintus Servilius Capio. The contract existed as a formal arrangement in Roman society. In the spring of 59 BC, to ensure the absolute and unwavering loyalty of Pompey, Caesar makes a calculated, cold-blooded decision. He abruptly breaks the existing betrothal contract, just as he broke it to Casutia 25 years before. Engagement, betrothal, marriage, and divorce, regardless of who the parties were always, and entirely, for Caesar himself. As documented by the historian Appian in his extensive records, the woman serves as the mechanism of exchange. The father trades the daughter to the rival. He transfers Julia to Pompey, a man who had recently divorced his wife Mucha. Pompey, then in his late 40s, was older than Caesar. As for Julia, the sources do not record her age with certainty, though the reconstructions place her at approximately 17. He was a man who had slaughtered the Marian faction, the political allies of Caesar's own family during the dictatorship of Sulla. The marriage contract was drafted. The woman was relocated to Pompey's household. Plutarch recorded that Pompey became entirely devoted to her, abandoning the forum to spend his days with her in his villas and gardens. The transaction succeeded. The father traded the daughter's body for the veterans of the husband. The human cost of this profound maneuvering requires compensation. To placate the deeply spurned and humiliated Servilius Capio, Pompey offers his own daughter in a rapid exchange of human property. Pompey's daughter is already engaged to Faustus, the son of Sulla. The lineage of the former dictator is overridden without hesitation. The women are reassigned. The privatization of Rome is sealed through matrimony. Julia secures the bond, handed from one household to another. Concurrently, Caesar adds another layer of security by marrying Calpurnia, the daughter of the influential Lucius Calpurnius Piso. Caesar ensures Piso becomes consul for the following year, manipulating the electoral system like a private ledger. The female bodies of the Roman aristocracy are reduced to mere political currency, traded and bartered by fathers to cement military and financial backing. It was a stark, heartbreaking illustration that the Republic had been entirely subsumed by the personal, familial, and autocratic networks of a few men. Cato observed the bartering of human beings. Plutarch recorded his statement to the Senate. It is intolerable that the supreme power should be prostituted by marriage alliances, and that men should advance one another to provincial commands and armies and lands by means of women. Yet, Cato would soon perfectly mirror the very methods of Caesar he had so vehemently condemned. With his political life pushed to the brink by Caesar's massive cartel, Cato ultimately secured his alliance with Bibulus by marrying off his own daughter, Portia, a girl barely 15, to a man older than Cato himself. Just like Caesar's, the marriage of his daughter was entirely for Cato himself. A daughter was merely an item, in the ledger of her father, in Rome. The fractured reflections. The institutions of the state remained physically intact. The Senate still met, the elections were still held, the laws were still inscribed in stone. The Senate voted on irrelevant matters. They believed they were the rulers of Rome, but they were administrators of a conquered estate. The Senate debated minor laws. The magistrates recorded the edicts. The stars moved across the Italian sky, and the universe paid no attention to the transaction. Only Cato bewailed his country. Cursing the fatal ambition, He recognized the terminal nature of the pact, and saw the altering of the whole constitution. The enemies of Caesar slighted the growth of his power at first, presuming his influence would fail when his money was gone. They realized too late that despising a danger makes it irresistible. Writing in private correspondence to his closest confidant, Marcus Tullius Cicero suspected the designs upon the government, seeing the temper of the man through the disguise of affability, and expressing the profound terror of the senatorial elite watching the Constitution being bypassed with effortless cruelty. History remembers the event through a fractured lens. Later historians, such as Appian, Cassius Dio, and Suetonius, writing centuries later from the safety of the established Roman Empire, look back at the events of 60 BC and see the inevitable gears of destiny. They frame Caesar as a visionary architect, constructing a deliberate path to absolute monarchy. Yet, modern scholars debate the certainty of this grand design. Many argue that this was not a mastermind's blueprint for empire, but merely a temporary, defensive cartel. The Republic was already structurally failing, crippled by immense wealth disparity and the privatization of military loyalty. The alliance of the three men was a desperate maneuver to protect their personal prestige, their dignitas, against a hostile and compromising Senate. They did not invent the corruption of the Republic. They merely exploited a system that had already lost its moral center. The Triumvirate functioned with absolute efficiency. The balance of power was maintained by the existence of Julia. Standing between the son-in-law and the father-in-law, she maintained the good understanding between the autocrats. Her breath sustained the peace of the empire. The precise geographic coordinates of the darkened room where Julius Caesar, Gnaeus Pompeius, and Marcus Licinius Crassus swore their initial, treasonous oaths, remain unconfirmed by history. Yet, the shadow cast by that unseen meeting utterly eclipsed the Roman Senate. The crossing of the Rubicon 10 years later would merely be the bloody consequence of what was set in motion here, in the quiet backrooms and the violent squares of Rome. The true fall of Rome began the moment three men decided that the laws of the Republic applied to everyone but themselves. Weeks after the wedding, a senator came to Pompey's house with matters of state. Troop allocations, provincial boundaries, the business that had filled 30 years of his life. He was told to wait. Pompey was walking in the garden with his wife. He did not come to the door until evening.